Black Myths podcast is an informative conversational show analyzing popular myths about Black culture of a socio-political nature.
Translation, we just debunking the bullshit that be said about Black people.
Hey y'all, while we're genuinely nerds and be doing this research for fun half the time, it does take a lot of work and effort, not only for us to be able to do this, but to also get people on the show to help bring this content to y'all. So to help us continue to bring you this important program, please consider becoming a Patreon, going to patreon.com/blackmyths. You can feel free to just check out our show notes for further information.
Hi, welcome to the Black Myths podcast. Welcome to the Black Myths podcast. I'm your host, Too Black. So this is part 2 of our series on the KKK. The first one was about the KKK being founded in Indiana, or it began in Indiana. As we'll get into a little bit more, but as we discussed in that episode, there wasn't even an Indiana Klan, let alone it being founded in the first wave of the Klan. It wasn't even a Midwestern thing at the time, you know. And in this episode, you're going to hear a lot about the Midwest, and you will hear about Indiana. But so this one is the myth is the KKK was a poor white movement, or exclusively a poor white movement. And this is in the monologue I did for the first episode, I kind of got at this, like, growing up. I know you didn't get to hear it because I put it in late, but growing up in Indiana, the Klan was very much alive in some ways, just the symbolisms of it, the Confederate flags, I mean, I even knew I don't think I put this in the monologue. My mom was working at a job one time, and this guy said he left the Klan because of her example. This is a real story. So, I talked about my brother's field trip that got canceled. It was a Civil War reenactment. It got canceled because it was supposed to be a Klan rally there instead. So, these are the things that we heard about, but we always saw them as like poor white trash, right? Like that was what we thought of the Klan. We didn't understand that it was really as organized as it once was. So as we're going to get into today, particularly in this wave of the Klan, the myth that it's just a bunch of poor white folks just doesn't hold up. They were always involved, but they were not the core audience, so to speak. So anyway, here with me is Rasul, who's our main historian, essentially on this topic. So welcome back to the episode.
Glad to be back for part 2 of 3 hours.
But yeah, so I guess I don't know, just to start out, before we could do a quick overview of the last episode to kind of so people know where we're at, but also just this myth of the KKK as a poor white movement. I'm sure you've heard it as well. Like I said, growing up here, that's how it was depicted, more by and large. And then you have to read history to learn there was actually much more sophistication and strategy to it than just hateful red poor white people who were acting quote unquote against their interests or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, growing up in Chicago, one, Chicago was pretty much, by the time I was growing up, dominated by neo-Nazi movement. So if we're talking about white supremacist based organizations, whether they were nationalists or separatists, Chicago was definitely a hotbed for neo-Nazi activity. Taking over Marquette Park, which I didn't live too far away from that. There was also the incident in Skokie, Illinois, in 1977. And then, the neo-Nazis were prominent in movies like The Blues Brothers, which you don't really even kind of realize, how much that they were in there. But but they were in there because that reflected, Chicago. So the Klan really didn't have as much of a presence by the time of the 70s and 80s, at least in the city of Chicago. what we would see is somebody on the Phil Donahue show. And Phil Donahue show, for some of your listeners, was the precursor to what we think of as daytime talk shows. So he preceded Oprah, basically, by the popularity of his type of show. All shows that are pretty much daytime, sort of owe a lot of debt to Phil Donahue.
And in some ways, you could probably connect even the idea of a podcast to.
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, he would have people on, and it wasn't like, playing around. So this wasn't Jerry Springer. I mean, he would have, clearly two opposing sides, and they would debate right there.
I have the Nation of Islam. That's how Muhammad got big. Was going on that show.
Yeah, he really had a pulse of what was going on, but visibly, that's who I would, that's when I would see the Klan. And for a time I worked at a movie theater, and one of the films that I prominently still remember is Mississippi Burning. And when you work at the theater, you see a movie probably 100 times, and so the Klan was, of course, in that. And then I remember seeing the Klan again in the movie called Betrayed. But these are all probably parts of, what we'll get to in terms of the third Klan, because, what's actually being depicted isn't any of these other clans. But I didn't know that. Most of us, as we mentioned in the first episode, think that the Klan was continuous, from Civil War era to the present day.
Some of us think it even goes back to slavery, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It created slavery, right?
Yeah. And I guess just to close out the loop on what we talked about, because again, obviously, y'all can go listen to the first episode. We're not about to give an exhaustive history, but the first we talked about there being three waves of the Klan. The first wave being shortly after the Civil War. The Civil War ends in 1865. You can say that Klan is founded in 1867, 1868, and is really over by 1871. And we talked about how there were four forced acts that were passed that basically eliminated them. And their main grievances were like in response to occupation by the Union in the North, or from the North to the South. And, obviously Black people getting some forms of freedom and any kind of political power. And they mainly did target Black people through grotesque, gratuitous violence, weren't very organized. Their leadership was often really disregarded by the rank and file. People were picking up the name and going with, picking up the name and going with it wherever they wanted. They didn't really have a clean sense of uniforms even, right? So some people wore red, some people put paint on their face. That's why if on YouTube, I try to find a picture of the first wave, and they look like bandits or something. Like somebody literally just has a cloth around their face. It's not synonymous and or it's not like this very uniform, strict way they are in this wave that we'll get to.
And remember, when they first started, they're more of like a fraternity, and so
that part.
So there's pictures of them just sitting there in suits with top hats that have painted on the top hat KKK, right? Like that's it, like so yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to kind of mention that sort of side point.
Yeah, for real. They start as a fraternity in Pulaski, Tennessee. So that's why we said it wasn't founded in Indiana. It didn't even have anything to do with Indiana. And originally they weren't even really engaging in a lot of violence. And then it takes off. Their mantle is actually picked up by other white supremacist groups, mainly as we talk about the red shirts, even though there was others. And then most of us who have any sense of, I guess, basic history of the Reconstruction era know about the Compromise of 1877, and Grant chooses not to run, and the federal troops are pulled out, and the South is able to reinstitute what they had really already been working towards up to that point. So that's a real basic overview. Y'all can go back and listen to it. We spend a lot of time laying down the backgrounds of things. You walked us through, even in that episode, pretty much up to Birth of a Nation,
Right.
the film by D.W. Griffith. I think sometimes there's a myth that the Klan started because of that film, but there was a chapter that was already founded prior to the film, as we'll get to. Yeah, I guess one other thing, I didn't write it in my notes, or I didn't write it in in the outline, but I think we had talked about this in our pre-production. I think this idea of what was whiteness
Yeah,
at
great
this
question.
time, right? Because like whiteness, and again, we're hovering in the we said 1915, but we're really like hovering around like the era you just named, 1900, late 1800s, into getting to this 1920s.
Yeah.
What is whiteness really understood as at that time? Because as we'll get to, like, Black people, like I said, we're not the main targets of this. A lot of other people that we would understand today as white were the targets of the Klan. So what was whiteness? Who was considered white? How did that actually operate in that time period?
Yeah, I mean, since whiteness is a part of race, it has a longer history, and of course, me with longer histories, but I'm not trying to go to the earliest possible thing. But Bacon's Rebellion, nonetheless, establishes white for the first time to be non-property owners, right? And they do that.
That's what year for people to.
Because I'm off the cuff, I cannot remember, offhand. But just to kind of give people a sense that Bacon's Rebellion is, a connected rebellion, meaning that
That's 1676.
okay, and so white indentured servants, white wage workers, black enslaved people, and black free people, and joined up primarily to try to seize indigenous people's property.
Yeah, that's why I always think this is overrated, but we'll
Yeah.
talk about it. But yeah, go ahead.
But legally, what ends up happening as a response to suppress the rebellion is a bunch of laws, and one law, shuts down communication, basically preventing groups from ever, meeting with one another, gathering with one another. So it was now illegal to conspire, in this particular way. But the most important thing is establishing the fact that white was no longer just property owner, because up until Bacon's Rebellion, white was synonymous with property owner only.
Right.
Um, and this is why, you had, anti-Irish, and other particular sort of, hatred towards groups that we would think are white in the present day. And then you come up to Shays, Rebellion, and that's in 1780 something. And Shays Rebellion establishes a second level of whiteness, now being immediate naturalization as an American citizen. So those immigrants that were coming from what we would think of as Middle and Western Europe, and they weren't coming from like England or France, were now accepted as white, with citizenship. And so they broke up that rebellion, because that rebellion was tied to, hey, we were veterans, we fought in the war, our debts should be sort of reconciled, and they weren't, and so only the wealthy
farmers, someone,
yeah, and so only the wealthy people had their debts sort of given after the war, and so that's what the rebellion was about. But the way to sort of suppress it was to, grandfather in and, enlarging whiteness to prevent more rebellion. And so those two sort of set the groundwork, and that is fine, up until a particular sort of, moment. But it's during, especially this sort of phases, the first phase and the second phase, that we begin to see, whiteness, beginning to, move forward and grow. So Irish is adopted into whiteness during the first, Klan, in many regards. Not necessarily because of the Klan, but I'm just using that particular period of time as a way to sort of also
during the
mark.
first Klan. Yeah.
Yeah. So while there was still some, anti-Irish sentiment, by and large, they were seen now as white. And also some cases, some German, immigrants had also been sort of accepted to some small degree. Because Civil War, you needed, so prior to the Klan Civil War, you needed these troops. And so many of the Irish were coming into the country. And of course, this is how we get the New York draft riots, because they literally are coming into the country and then immediately are forced to, fight in the war on behalf of the North. Even though New York City was a slave city,
Yeah. Boston.
Yeah, exactly. The state might have been a free state, but New York was a slave city. So, we then see in the second Klan, especially towards the end of it, getting, to World War II, you start seeing then Jewish and Italian populations now being grandfathered in as white, because yet again, you needed these populations to, increase the size of the military. And it was also
for World War II.
World War II. And so it was a great PR move also to show that, hey, unlike these other armies, we're diverse, and we're not diverse because these are people from our colonies. These are citizens, unlike the British, right? The British had their colonial troops, but, that's jumping the gun, because before they're accepted, the Klan makes them a target. So I think that
the Klan, would you say the Klan understood them as white, or what would they have understood?
No, I wouldn't say that they, at all. I think the Klan wouldn't accept them at all. I think it was more so.
I mean, they pushed this whole like 100% American thing or whatever, right?
Yeah. And so, and 100% American, has roots in early nativism that preceded, even the first Klan. So more so, I'm saying the like American consciousness, but definitely the PR machine of the State Department helped to push a notion of a diverse military. And when we say diverse in this context, it was Jewish and Italian integration into the military. So that's just, a way to think about what you were just asking about in terms of the evolution of whiteness throughout these particular periods.
No, it's helpful because, like, you have, like you say, you have the Italians, you have these Eastern Europeans who were coming over at around this time, and when I say this time again, we're at the beginning of 1900, because there's these, and we're going to get into it now. There's these shifts that occur technologically, in industrialization, cities become more prominent, right? Like all of these things are occurring, so to have these big mechanisms of these big manufacturing plants, you need more workers, and you cannot rely on your current population to do all the work. So there had to be an influx of immigrants in to actually just fulfill the jobs. But we'll get to that. That creates conflict amongst the labor base, right? And the Klan is able to seize that as an opportunity to grow their thing. So I guess the first question on that point, you have this growing industrialization. What exactly is that? Because I'm just kind of speaking about it vaguely. I guess a little more detail when we say industrialization. And we have these workers coming in. What was the situation, I guess, prior to this major push in industrialization? And how do cities play a role in that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, because I think it also, goes back to our continued criticisms of how we're raised in terms of U.S. education systems. And so when we think of industrial revolution, we can't really imagine what that even means.
Yeah.
We think that means like some guy is sitting behind some machine and with some levers, with his hands and with his feet, he's moving something, right?
And a hard hat or
yeah, and that's the press, right? As opposed to thinking that industrialization means that things can be produced in mass quantities. So manufacturing, so not only could it be created in mass quantities, but it could be packaged in ways that allow for for food preservation, right? So you have now no longer the canned jelly, that has, that's with the glass, can.
Basically a mason jar, right?
A mason jar, right?
Yeah.
Instead of that, you start, imagining something, made out of different types of metals, because they're sort of playing around with this notion that preserves the food, but they can make now hundreds of it, thousands of it, as opposed to, a few hundred per month type of thing. So industrialization speeds up mass production, so it increases the scale. So cities, in particular, become an important location because cities are proximate to ports for shipping, but also for rail. And so you have to have materials to actually do
railroads.
Yeah, railroads. And so you had to have the materials to be able to do this mass production work. And so instead of that coming into a city and then going to a smaller city, the cities themselves become the sort of important area, right, of those materials being dropped off. But also cities can house way more people and then also service way more people. When we say service, everything from grocery shopping to, dental and healthcare and so forth. So cities become a major sort of focal point. And so you have this shifting economy from agricultural industry to, machine production, retail production. And so, New York City in particular, it has a population of, let's say, 600,000 people in 1850, which was, significant. And New York has always had the biggest population of all cities, probably since 1820, 1810. I mean, it's always been the biggest city. So by the turn of the century, they're the first city that is well over 1 million people, because of this. And so New York could then house multi-industries, not just timber, timber production. I mean, so even though doesn't have trees in New York, but trees can be sent to New York and they can produce things from the trees, right? Well, they can handle multiple things. They can handle, fishing, and mass production of sort of like canned fish, canned goods, to, large scale textiles and so forth. So I think that's one way to think about the importance of cities attracting and being a place for populations to sort of ground themselves in because of the sheer opportunities that are present.
And this will be part of how, just stand on New York for a second, how it becomes this so-called melting pot as it's marketed, right?
Right.
And I say as it's marketed, not the actual. I know I have a lot of issues with that term, but in terms of they have all these different ethnic groups to this day. I mean, that's kind of how we even understand New York. You have like a little Italy, like you have these different groups that existed. We watched our movies and like Godfather, and you get that sense too, right? Like, but that really is tied to, at least to some extent, right, this massive expansion of capital, of industry, right? That's what's bringing these people over to I don't know if it's the entire reason why they're coming. That plays a major role in it, right?
Exactly, because I mean, if people are becoming citizens, why would they enter New York first? Why wouldn't it be like Baltimore, near the capital, right? Very near to Washington D.C., especially since most of the departments that would grant citizenship would be down there. Well,
right.
they had it in New York because, because of it being a finance center, but also being a major port that could, bring in tons of ships. But U.S. cities overall, they were all growing. I saw one sort of indicator that nearly 15 million people, in the course of 2 decades, were in U.S. cities before 1900. So in terms of the whole overall U.S. population. And so besides New York, you had Chicago growing, you had Philadelphia, growing. You had cities that were both created as well as cities that were already existing grow further. So cities that were created were like Pullman, Illinois, that's just outside of Chicago. And Pullman, Illinois was associated with, the Pullman, cars for the trains, the luxury cars. And so, Pullman creates this city to make his workers live there, pay rent there, so they can be close to work. Same thing with Hershey, Pennsylvania. We watch those horrible episodes on history.com, History Channel, whatever. Like, I forgot what those shows are, but it's like how they make it seem like
there's a million Late America or something like that. Yeah, I know what you're talking about, like Ford and all those. Yeah,
exactly. So Hershey, Pennsylvania is, comes out of nowhere, and it's a company town, and the company town is a company city and so Hershey, Pennsylvania is where they, made the chocolate, started the making of the chocolate. And so he wanted his workers there. So he would have apartments, and he would then also bring in other businesses and so forth to make his workers comfortable, quote unquote.
Right.
And then you also had Lowell, Massachusetts, which was big in textile. That technically Lowell was the first of the company towns. So those were examples of like the created cities, but the existing cities that grew, Detroit, between like 1870 and 1900, grows from 79,000 to like nearly 300,000, and so, and it's part of a major manufacturing hub. It too is also a port, and, listen to ports and rail, with each of these cities. You had Seattle, which had its own boom, and it was also tied to shipbuilding, itself. Nashville, which was tied to iron production, and that was the important sort of, thing that gets Nashville started, and then being able to grow into some other particular areas. Pittsburgh itself, steel industry, hence the name of the football team, Steelers. Yeah. I mean, so that's not because of, that's a neat old mascot. Like, no, U.S. Steel, is one of the major companies that, grows in Pittsburgh. But even prior to U.S. Steel itself was part of Pittsburgh. It's a production hub. You have mines all around Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania. You have Birmingham, Alabama, becomes an important also southern steel hub, but also a processor of coal and limestone, as well as iron, and then, Milwaukee, you have, not only a certain sort of group of immigrants, Welsh and German coming into that area, but you also have, the mass production of, breweries, and that's hence the name brewers. I mean, these aren't arbitrary mascot names. These are tied to the importance of these industries in establishing these cities. Portland, becomes a major, attractor of.
Then the name too.
Yeah, right. And 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 ironically though, with Portland, with the name, it becomes a major sort of rail, production, and then, you have Cleveland, it grows, also during this particular, time period, and, and then you have Minneapolis, you have Newark. So you get the idea that while, New York by and large is growing leaps and bounds over, these other places, these other cities, are becoming, strong features, of the United States, and people are coming in. So even though they may be coming to New York first as immigrants, they're leaving New York and going to these other particular spaces.
Yeah, in the book, just so people can get some of our references, the book, The Rise of the Ku Klux Klan, he actually references my hometown, Muncie, Indiana, the book, Middletown, A Study of American Culture, because there was this idea that Muncie was this like perfect American city. It was right in the middle of the quote unquote Midwest. But he contrasts that with, says up until 1920, those were the smaller towns that people really were based in. And then he said by 1920, you have most of Americans, quote unquote, are based in these cities, like live in cities.
Yeah.
But prior to that, most people did not, like literally as a population, most people did not live in cities. So to all that you just laid out, that's what is causing this, and in some ways it kind of seems like a bit of another enclosure.
Yeah,
Good
point. Yeah,
because it's like your people do have like a little bit of ownership over the means of production within their small hubs, mainly, obviously not us Black folks for the most part, but these white Protestant folks do have their main hubs, or they do have some kind of ownership because they're able to produce things on their land or whatever. But big industrial companies can just wipe you out of business. Like you can't keep up. You know what I mean? So it's like, I guess, like, again, we're trying to. This may not, people may be like, we all were just talking about the Klan. What's it got to do with it? We're trying to give you a sense of what actually is giving the groundwork for a movement like the Klan to even emerge. And also coming back to the myth, why it's not just this poor white people thing, because I guess if you could talk more about who were really losing jobs and industry because of what you just named, right? Like who was really losing out on that?
Yeah, I mean, we see labor struggles in the present day where people believe that, such and such, fill in the blank immigrant is taking my jobs. Well, this was the sentiment because to maximize profits, you either cut wages or you pay workers who only want to work at or who are willing to work at a lower wage. And so when these immigrants come in, and they need employment, and you have this industry that's also growing in high numbers, you don't want to have, skilled workers who had already been working for years because they demand higher pay.
And when you say, just for the people listening, because I be on Twitter too much, but people make this skilled versus unskilled thing. What do we mean when we say skilled workers? Like, what's that actually mean in economic terms? Not, this isn't a moral judgment, right? It's like, what do we mean?
Yeah. So
person's unskilled. Yeah.
So one particular trade that I'm personally familiar with is carpentry, right? And so if we think of unskilled worker, some of us have bought tables where the legs are wobbling. That's an example of probably something that was made by somebody who was unskilled.
Just on the assembly line.
Exactly, assembly line, or, they didn't measure something properly and so forth, or don't understand dimensions. Whereas a skilled worker would have had years of already been either apprentice, so they worked under somebody else and worked under somebody else for a period of time in which that master worker would sort of okay, I think they've gone through all the rounds of possible errors and possible issues. And so if they get the stamp of approval, then they now, can be accepted into the trade to work, or they can be accepted into the trade at a higher level than just a person who's working in the shop sweeping.
Right.
So skilled labor is somebody who receives training, and you want people who have skill, in many cases, because, the short leg table is one thing for carpentry. But in terms of nursing, that's the one leg table is
flying a plane.
Is the person who is, in the last room in the hallway, and somebody forgot to, go down to that room for the past 2 days. because, somebody who's skilled knows how to do the repetitions of the rounds, and then when you go in to check the rooms, what do you do? Do you just, put your head in, it looks alive, and then you walk out, and that type of thing. I mean, skilled is pretty highly valued, and, but it's one of those things where, you have different periods of time in which skilled laborers are the ones who are pushing for union organizing and are asking for greater, salaries, greater wages. And so sometimes then ownership goes to unskilled because they're cheaper. And so during those period of times, you have these quality control issues. You have accidents that may occur. You go to a restaurant and, the coffee is boiling hot. When you're served coffee or soup, it's not supposed to be scolding hot. You have to like wait a little bit. As somebody who's skilled and has been trained, typically as a person who kind of knows that,
Yeah, like it's like a chef versus a McDonald's cook. Again, this isn't a moral judgment on the people. It's just obviously, I mean, I've worked at these low end places. I'm not a chef if I make a pizza, at Pizza Hut. There's just something to look at, on the make table. I throw the cheese on 60 different pepperonis to put it in the oven. You're like, I did this for 10 years. Like, versus if you go to a higher end pizza place, it's like there's like temperature and the amount of time the dough was even like away versus we use frozen dough. Like that's a skilled work.
It's an art.
Yeah.
It's a complete art. Yeah.
We just throw some shit on a pie and put it in the oven, basically. That's what we were doing, right? And so I'm saying, trying to get people to transport that to back then, like there are a lot of folks who were coming over. It's not that even if some of them might have been this skilled in other areas, they just simply were looking for work, and you got a minimal amount of training maybe at the job, but you didn't have years of apprenticeship and nah, that's not.
But in some cases that they did, they were like owners. They were owners in the old country, so whatever their old country was, but they didn't have the capital. They didn't come over here with the capital, so they can't set up a business. So
right. So even if they were skilled, they had to do unskilled labor. Yeah,
exactly. So they were paid as an unskilled worker, even though they had the knowledge. And so it's not necessarily union busting because there's
like union prevention.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And in some cases, the more militant unions of this particular time period, which they were a lot more militant, during this time period, were more in like steel, rail, and so forth. And then in those cases, it might have been a little bit more like multi-ethnic to some degree. But in textiles, in shipping, and some of these other things, that was less so. And so now these quote unquote American laborers are being frozen out of a job because of these newly arrived immigrants.
Right. And so these American laborers were primarily white Protestants, correct? Like,
yeah, to some degree, or agnostic or whatever else. I know, in prepping for this, we talked about the acronym of WASP, and how much it has no meaning in the present day. But how, even right up to, my time period, it was still sort of like a term.
White American.
Yeah. As if,
white Anglo-Saxon
Protestant.
Yeah. Not American, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant.
So people themselves didn't call themselves WASP, per se. It was something that was sort of derogatory placed upon them. But, these notions of Anglo-Saxonism, that's an actual political ideology from, 1790s up to, this is what makes the Monroe Doctrine, is Anglo-Saxonism, right? Monroe Doctrine is the sort of understanding that everything in the this particular side of the hemisphere, United States, Canada, Central America, Caribbean, and South America is exactly. And so Europe better not come over here for any particular reason. Otherwise, United States takes that as a declaration of war. And that's the Monroe Doctrine, but that was built upon Anglo-Saxonism, and so this is why then some of these particular territories that then were consumed by the United States, these people don't have citizenship, or their territory is not considered a state because of Anglo-Saxonism, and then Protestant comes into play with this second Klan, this period of anti-Catholic sentiment.
Yeah, and it's a good slight tweak in terms of they're not all like card-carrying, hardcore Protestants. That's something the Klan rallies around, even if they loosely think, like it is today.
Baptists, whatever.
Yeah,
Right.
It's like most Christians don't call, I don't know how it was back then, but most Christians in my reading of history don't necessarily call themselves Protestants. It was just clear that you're not Catholic.
Right.
Like that's where the lines get drawn.
And the issue with Catholic is that unlike the other denominations, there is a central leadership in Catholicism with the Pope. And the Pope then has, it's almost a political, it's almost a military protocol with, everything from your, local priest, to a sort of, a diocese, so sort of a regional area that's controlled by another particular priest, and then you have a state, ran by, who runs that. Then a larger geographical region in the country is ran by others. And so then the Pope is over all this. And so people see this or saw this as you have a second leadership. You have a second alliance or allegiance to another leadership, another flag than the United States.
You're not American.
Right. And so if the Pope disagrees with the United States, which side are you going to be on?
Right.
So this was problematic to be then Catholic. And so this is what grows anti-Catholic sentiment to be beyond just the old nativists. Well, these people aren't human; they're not white, right? The old nativists, that was their position. The new nativists, they're human, but they're Catholic and they're not American. And so this kind of becomes, this sort of backdrop. It's a useful way to make sure that there's no labor allegiance, right? Because these people see each other as different, and now not just different because of some ethnic, lines, but a clear sort of religious typically will kind of, connote like morality, and so forth.
Right. So coming back to the myth, these are not, I think this kind of will tie it in terms of these were a lot of these folks that were, like I said, these are highly skilled folks that are getting kind of pushed out, or at least their bargaining power is being reduced. And also in the Rise of the Klan, he talks about how even the like small store retailers were, getting pushed out, like these small business owners were. So it's not just the highly skilled labor,
right? Yeah,
small business owners, because they can't even have, like now, there's all these other retail stores because there's so much more stuff to sell. So they don't have the same monopoly that they would have had in the smaller towns. So they're also receiving a kind of, like he talks about in the book, he calls it a power devaluation that's occurring for this group of people. But these are not poor white folks. Like, and these are the folks who eventually like take on what we call the Klan. This is who the Klan actually goes and recruits. This is who they go, this is who they go talk to. This is the group of people, that they target. It doesn't mean poor white people didn't join. It's not, we're not saying it wasn't, but it wasn't, this wasn't the poor white people in this equation, even though white, like we said, is a relative term, would be the immigrants technically, like they would be the poor whites who are working for lower wages because they're coming from another country. They are the Catholics in many cases, right? Like, but again, they're not really considered white by these WASP folks, but I'm saying like they would be the poors, quote unquote, in this equation, not the folks who had a retail store or who were, had who were over farms that are now being pushed out by a bigger agricultural industry, or like you said, these different artisans and skilled laborers. These are the folks that were doing okay prior to, this growth in industrialization. And this late form grievances can go a lot of different places, but the Klan, as we'll get to, is able to seize on those grievances when they didn't, and not everybody went for it, but like particularly in Indiana, 89 of the 92 counties all had a Klan chapter at one point. So, so Indiana, not we, because I wouldn't have been in those chapters, but this state, was very deeply involved in it. So that's for that. I don't know if you want to say anything on that.
Yeah. I guess just for people to visualize, what we're, if we think about classes of people, based upon their education and their monetary value, right? So this isn't Rockefeller and Carnegie.
No.
And this is not
Rockefeller's actually who's putting them out of work.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, so you have these other battles that are happening with these people, so they have a range of grievances, wage loss, job loss, but then also, their owners are, bringing out the military, and killing them, right? Like, all during the, 1890s, 1910s are some very
private police forces.
Yeah. And so again, this is not the Carnegie and Rockefellers. These are not the level of executive management that's just under them. This would be the people who are under that.
This would be the original understanding of petty bourgeois. Like
right.
Nowadays people give it other, but this would be like when you read about petty bourgeois, like in that era, like these are small business owners, highly skilled laborers in a small industry, right? Like they're not a multinational, right? Like that's not.
Yeah, if we put it in McDonald's terms, this is not Ronald McDonald's board,
No.
Somewhere else, and this is not the owner of the store, that is in your city or neighborhood area. This is the manager of the store,
right? Or even if it was the owner, it's the mom and pop store that cannot compete with McDonald's franchise.
Correct.
It's the breakfast spot that gets put out of business by McDonald's breakfast, or it's the it's that's what I mean. It's these. And if it's laborers, it's if you have a mechanic in your town who everybody goes to, and then all of a sudden Meineke comes to town, right? And they can cut prices,
right?
That mechanic can't compete, right? Like it's these mom and pop, like it's what really is in today's terms like the Trump base in many ways. Like people, that's another myth, is they think it's all these poor white folks. It's this similar kind of dynamic. That's why I found this wave, I think, so interesting, is because there is this kind of battle with like big capital and small capital.
Yeah, I mean, I know most listeners probably aren't from this particular time period, but I remember distinctly that there was a time in which people did not want Walmart and Target coming into their town or city, because that would freeze out all of these smaller businesses that had different components of what is in a Walmart or Target.
Rather just an aisle in Target or in Walmart is a whole store. So.
Yeah, and so there was, that used to be a greater pushback. Literally protests by an entire small town of people against it. Now everybody wants that in there because this is the only sort of employment, even if the wages are not great.
Right.
But the point that we're trying to, give you is that these are not unhoused, unemployed people. These are not custodians, janitors, or plumbers. These are the people who own the plumbing business. These are the people who own the custodial, firm, or the chain of laundromats. This is who becomes the people to form the Klan.
Yeah.
And so, and so William Joseph Simmons, military, background, he's solicited to basically become the leadership. So if we think about, unlike Bedford Forest is the first Klan. The Klan had already started. They, in Pulaski, Tennessee, they vote Bedford Forest as the leadership of the Klan. So Bedford Forest himself doesn't start the Klan. He's called in to sort of lead the Klan. In this case, William Joseph Simmons actually is the sort of instigator of, thinking about, hey, I think we should revive this thing. And they go to Stone Mountain to conduct a ritual, and they install him as emperor. He's the author of the Koran, the sort of,
some of this shit is funny, man. Like, I'm sorry.
So with the K.
I want people to know that's spelled with a K. It's almost like Bloods that never want to use, C, so they put like K on everything, like that joke. So like they have all these K, Cloran, the Claverns, the like
yeah, no, I mean, sometimes in newspaper ads, if it was a Klan member who owned the business, they would extensively use K. So yes, Kodak starts with a K, but it ends with a C, but instead it'll start with a K. And so one, if you were a reader and you were in a Klan, that this was a Klan business. So, the Kodak Camera Club, right? And so all the C's were, replaced with K's. And so, but so he's installed as, the emperor. Again, this is 1915. And this is also the reason why, Georgia becomes such a, hotbed of the second and third Klan. And it grows rapidly, of course, some people feel it grows to about 6 million. So, I don't know about that because in certain cases, Indiana itself had 2 million at its height. And so it has to be a lot larger. But yes, Americanism, the American way, 100% Americanism, these are all the sort of founding ideologies. And because of that, Black people are less important. In this case, Black people are now a quote unquote accepted labor force because based upon this, racial order, Black people were never going to get higher. So they were always going to be locked into a certain,
right.
In large quantities in terms of a certain employment. And so they weren't a threat of, removing somebody, from a job.
Other than kind of what I was getting at earlier, where that's something else that that the author got at was just that Black people. What was the author? Or McVeigh, that was his name. Roy McVeigh. Sounds like an author or something, but Roy McVeigh. He got at the fact that he found when he actually quotes what was it, Tony and
Beck.
Yeah, Tony and Beck, he actually uses their work to make some of these points. But in terms of when in the early 1900s, before the industrialization really starts to take off, you have these race riots and things occurring, and the South is able to keep Black folks primarily in these like sharecropper, positions and things of that nature. Once the Great Migration starts to pop off, the violence starts in some sectors to retreat a little bit because now there's actual labor competition because Black folks are moving to these cities, that are either in the north or even cities in the South, like you were saying, like Birmingham or something, and leaving the countryside. Obviously, they're also just leaving because it's just terror, but that creates a condition where the plantation owner, for instance, might want to keep they want to keep them there, and they can't just use pure violence because these folks could just leave. So now they might, actually protect them from the poor whites who do want to attack them. Like there were cases of this, or that's why the Klan steps in and in some areas and either discourages violence against Black people, not that they all, held to it. Or and like I was saying earlier, actually just intervenes against some lynchings because the logic was if if they go to work at these big factories, they're actually just contributing to the very problem that we claim we're trying to solve as the Klan. Like that's the thinking. That's so the Great Migration plays a role, but it's not or Black people are not the to your point, are not the primary target in this era as much as I think some folks want to believe we were. There's just no evidence of it.
But again, I think going back to the first recipe, which was the release of The Birth of a Nation, I think, while it's not the singular reason, it was major because of not only how long it ran in the theaters, but the actual content and imagery in the movie itself.
Yeah, that film, I guess I just asked one. I haven't even really been asking anything I wrote down, but it's credited with being like the first feature film in cinema. That's not actually true. It's the first, maybe in American cinema, but not actually in world cinema.
Yeah, I think the first silent film was in Australia or something like that.
Yeah. And groundbreaking cinematography. Even though I always hear when I was in school, they would talk about there's all these close-ups, but on rewatch, there's like no close-ups. I don't know what people are.
Yeah. So yeah. So the importance. So in film studies, the movie is incredibly important because it's the first original music score written with for an orchestra. It's also the introduction of nighttime photography.
Mm-hmm. That's how you get that red and stuff like it.
It also establishes, major costuming on a mass scale. So this is, from this particular movie, you get to Birth of a Nation. Not Birth of a Nation, Game of Thrones. I guess that's Birth of a Nation, but Game of Thrones, but Birth of a Nation establishes the costuming on a mass scale for, a widespread, group of extras to, achieve actual historical accuracy. You also have the use of parallel action in the editing, so the process or the actual editing in the sequence. You also have techniques of moving, traveling, or panning camera, taking shot, tracking shots. So moving with the horse,
which might sound like nothing to us today, but yeah, everything used to just be. It was almost like they just filmed stage plays back then.
Right.
Now you get actual movement, and you watch a show like Succession, and they'll do a whole scene in one room with a bunch of people, and the camera can move around and all of that, like one shot and something like, but still movement. Like back then that wasn't regular.
And this movie establishes, it introduces it. And so also the use of vignettes. So, balloons that would pop up into little corners, or shrink down into like an iris shot, before fading into black. The actual dramatization of any history itself. This was an important sort of contribution of Birth of a Nation. Without Birth of a Nation, you don't get Gone with the Wind, as an example.
Yeah, we love that movie too, of course.
Right. Yeah. Which actually had a Klan scene in it, but it was cut. So it was almost like a revival of the Birth of a Nation. And then you actually had staged battle scenes, which also wasn't depicted really before. So yet again, this goes back to that reference of like a Game of Thrones, what about like this is for the first time you actually had like pyrotechnics, the smoke coming out of a cannon and the cannon firing, the blank shots coming out of a rifle. and having hundreds of extras sort of performing this, right?
It was, and we say feature film for those who, and I don't encourage anybody to watch it, but it was 3 hours and 13 minutes.
Yeah, it ranges from 133 minutes to 193 minutes, depending upon which cut.
Yeah, the cut I watched was the 193. If you'd have told me it was a shorter one, I would have watched that. But I love to suffer, so I watched the longest one.
And then I think the last contribution in terms of film studies, it was the first extensive cross cutting between two scenes. So what we know of as the montage effect.
Yeah, because a lot of the film is someone in a house and then all this chaos outside. There's a lot of that, especially on the second half of it. So there's these white people inside scared, and then there's all these Negroes outside who are actually white folks in blackface outside, like going crazy, and they do a lot of that cutting to tell the story while they didn't put the text on the screen to kind of help you follow along with the storyline.
Yeah, so D.W. Griffith, who again is the director of this, and interestingly enough, he also does a film on Mexican independence. Go figure. With actual fighters, of Pancho Villa, But anyway, D.W. Griffith introduces all this. So this is one of the reasons why it still sort of lingers to today. It's not lingering to this day because people just love the Klan and love the content of the Klan. And it literally establishes these things that are fundamental to most of the films, most of the TV shows we, think today, much less, like you said, with the Donahue point, even podcasts that are on, video, right? The montage effect is, us on the screen, and then you move to an image of the Klan or some text. That would be an example of something that came out of D.W. Griffith and The Birth of a Nation. But yeah, it's a historical romance of the Civil War and Reconstruction. It revises the history, but in some cases, when you look into the history, it begins to paint an understanding of our point from the first episode, which is, what it was like to live under military occupation, and so they show, there's these two families, one from the South, one from the North, the Camerons from the South, the Stonemans are from the North, and the Stonemans are friends to the Camerons, and so it's post-war, so they're tense with each other, but they're trying to reconnect, but the Camerons in particular are experiencing, and other people in the South are experiencing intimidation on the streets and so forth by, U.S. troops. And so it highlights this particular thing, but, it goes through a number of, different scenes, different sort of stereotypes. You have everything from the setting up of, the black savage, coming after the white woman.
Yeah.
Even though rumblings of that were present beforehand, it's really the visuals of this, this blackface sergeant in the U.S. military who is
in that scene they put the text on the screen like he's like, I'm a sergeant now, like now you better take me, white woman, because I'm a sergeant, or I'm a captain. It actually says I'm a captain in the Army now. And it's like, now you should, so he chases that white woman around. And then, she obviously doesn't want anything to do with him. And then she says, if you don't leave me alone, I'm going to jump. And she jumps off of a cliff, which, this might seem, watching it as a film might seem mild in terms of the cinematography compared to how that would play out today. But at that time, again, like you laid out, this is groundbreaking in terms of visual, so seeing that. And again, even that was a white man in blackface.
Yeah. Now they do have black actors in the film, but the lead, quote unquote, black characters are blackface. And
the mayor, not the mayor, the governor Lynch.
Yeah, and so so besides the sort of technical sort of attributes of Birth of a Nation in terms of montage and so forth, the storyline presents, important sort of content very early on, where the South has signed the sort of Gettysburg, so between Lee and Grant, it has a card that's it indicates the bringing of prior to that, bringing of Africans to America planted the first seed of disunion.
Yep.
So blaming the Civil War now on the presence of Black people.
Yep.
That so it establishes that. After that signing, it has a card that says the end of state sovereignty.
Yep.
So we get we establish this sort of the power of the myth of state states' rights. Then, of course, like what we already said, which is the 5 districts, where Southern leaders could be hung, and treated as conquered, provinces. The other particular sort of aspects that we begin to sort of see, besides, like I said, the ways in which the rape myth, is highlighted by this hungry sergeant, in the military, but also, as you already said, the quote unquote mulatto is also one of the people who also has these sort of passions, because there's daughters for both of these families.
He actually says, they put that card on the screen, I want me a white woman. Like, that actually comes up on the screen.
Yep. Yeah.
But even when he gets elected, they make it seem like there's all these, invading Black people who elected him, and the white people weren't allowed to vote. Like, it's a total fantasy of, like I said, it's their version of what they say occupation was like. And then it's this fantasy that all these Black people came down and took away everything from them. I guess you can,
yeah. So like
I have a question about this, but finish telling it first.
Yeah. So I mean, they have this image of DC where the lawmakers in DC are majority Black. In this case, it's not the blackface actors. It's actually Black actors.
Those are actually Black folks, yeah.
And and you have everything from them taking their shoes off and putting their feet on top of.
Oh man, that was probably the most aggravating scene.
Picking their toes, just cutting their toenails.
They're in a office. Again, for people,
they're in the floor of Congress.
They're not an office. They're in full Congress, and it's all Black people, and they literally don't have their socks or shoes on. They're throwing their feet up on. They're
getting drunk.
Acting a fool, right? Like, and this is how they depict it. I guess, I mean, we could get into how it all ends, but this film was clearly aimed at Black people. Like, this was not about immigrants or anything. So how does I mean, we laid out the conditions. I think that gives some backdrop, but how do people watch that and not want to go out? Or is it, I don't know. That film clearly didn't inspire the specific Ku Klux Klan to make Black people their target, but did that film inspire other people, other white people, to make Black people their target? That film makes Black people look horrible. I mean, it starts a long tradition of this, in film that still goes on. So, like, but when we talk about this wave of the Klan, like we said, Black people were not the main target. So how do you reconcile that? That's why I say I think Birth of a Nation is a little overplayed, because one, you don't really see the Klan, like when we're talking about the marketing and all that starts in the 1920s. That's 5 years after this.
Right.
Also, time moved a lot slower back then. So 5 years is a lot. So it's like, for all the hype about this, the Klan itself did not rise and then go make Black people their target, which is how it's usually told. As this film gets seen, the Klan forms, and then you get this sense that they just go out and start hunting Black folks. But the Klan was a pretty weak, even like they got more recruitment than when Simmons started it, but they didn't have these massive numbers until 5-10 years later. So how do we reconcile with that? Because that couldn't quite understand that one.
Yeah, I mean, how I read it, and because I've watched this movie so many times, unfortunately, it goes back to the earlier sort of points it makes in the film, which is Africans coming to America is the first seed of sowing disunion between the North and the South. So instead of the movie really being focused around the Black savage or the occupying force, the movie is all about the northern and the southern white person coming together to protect all other sort of white people. So it's this sort of it's this reconciliation. And so that's why, I think that's why it's not a movie that people, see it as Black people as a target. They see in it as, no, right, these Black people are the reasons why we have not been able to come together. They talk about Black sovereignty, Black supremacy, so that goes back to, the Wilmington sort of claims, because, Wilmington had widespread Black leadership in multiple levels of, authority and government, literally, and so I think there was
also, looking at, I did a screenshot of a few of these cards. The Freedmen's Bureau, the Negroes getting free supplies, the General North misused to delude the ignorant.
Yeah, yeah.
That's kind of, I mean, because this is a quote. I think this is in, what was it? I'm about to read something out of the Imperial, not the. They had a magazine. What was it called? Or a news?
Imperial Nighthawk.
Yeah, the Imperial Nighthawk. This is one of the. I think this was actually Hiram that said this. We haven't even got to them yet.
Yeah.
But it says, we the Klan are supposed to hate the Negro. Nothing could be further from the truth. The Negro is brought to America. He came as a slave. We are in honor and duty bound to promote his health and happiness. Which, again, I don't think people would believe that anyone ever wrote this, but he cannot be assimilated. Intermarriage with him on a whole scale is unthinkable. There are more than 10 millions of him, about a tenth of our population. He cannot attain the Anglo-Saxon level. So they're still saying, like, you can't be us. But rushing into the cities, he is retrograding rather than advancing, and his rate of mortality is shockingly high. It is not in his interest any more than the interest of the white population that he should seek to assume the burdens of modern government. Those are almost too heavy for the strongest shoulders, and weight is increasing. However much we may regret to state truth, when the truth is otherwise unpleasant, it is better that we be stated. I am sure the interests of all will be served thereby. So they walk this line of, like, the Negro is here and here to stay on a subservient level nonetheless, can't marry us, don't deserve jobs, are a problem, but there is this, like, sense of they're here to stay, not we should kick them out or keep them out in the way that they're attacking, like, Catholics and everything.
Yeah, as long as Black people they know their place, they know their role, fine, right? The whole point is not to allow Black supremacy, right? Whatever that means, right?
And I guess Black supremacy didn't really pose much of a threat to them again, Black supremacy from their perspective, I don't even know what that means in real life, but I'm saying, other than there are references, like, we haven't really talked about their feelings about like, the communists were going to make Negroes, I'm using Negroes because this is the language, the communists were going to get in our heads, because that's an old adage, and that kind of starts around that time. These communists were going to get us to rise up. So they hated, like, the African Blood Brotherhood and, organizations like that. Because there was this Red Scare also, I guess, we don't really even talked about that, but there's also a Red Scare that's occurring around this time. It was a Bolshevik Revolution until 1917. Right? So you also have that, but that's still a fear that it will infect us. But like you said, as long as we maintain our place, and I guess maybe that's the message that, maybe I'm watching the film too much from my own, like, personal, but I guess maybe that's the message that people took from it. Like, the Negro just needs to know his place.
but you got and so that's what I mean. When you look at the end, I mean, depends upon which version you're looking at. They end with the car or the former enemies of North and South are united again in common defense of their Aryan birthright. Another version,
because the niggas lost their mind. They all
and then another version of the ending, it says, dare we dream of a golden day when the bestial war shall rule no more, but instead the gentle prince in the hall of brotherly love in the city of peace. So the message, begins and ends with this sort of unification. Of course, there's, people make much ado about Woodrow Wilson. There's even an opening card that says, Woodrow Wilson's praise of it. There's no evidence that he actually said it, even though, it's been constantly sort of used, but he did screen it.
He did screen it. So he was friends with the guy that wrote the Klansman.
So he did screen it in the White House. We just don't know that he actually said that word, that it's history written with lightning.
Right.
And so, the response was immediate. People went to see it in multiple screenings. People were, wanted to create the Klan, and people who were already, had some sense of the Klan used it to get other people. Now, one of the sort of reactions to it that I always think about is in Indiana, which is in Lafayette, where white man leaves the movie theater immediately and shoots and kills a black teenager.
That's what I was curious. That's the stuff I was asking about. Like, I was like, someone had to be inspired.
Yeah, but I mean,
it wasn't the Klan,
But I think it's no different than any other sort of film or TV show where you have different sort of readers of a thing. So while I think the main message was this unification, you still had other readers who took it in other particular ways. Because, like we know, by and large, the Second Klan did not have black people as its focus whatsoever. And like we also said that in some cases, especially in southern cities, black folks, the Klan wanted black folks to, as long as they stay in the position, they didn't want them to be harmed by other groups who were targeting black people.
Yeah, because it messes with their whole Ponzi scheme.
I think, again, I think what you're making sure people have an understanding of is not to put so much emphasis on the birth of a nation. The birth of a nation is an important aspect of it in 1915. So, it releases in February. It goes out of theaters and then comes back into theaters because of its popularity. So it's shown probably over like a 90-day period, which is unheard of for films then as well as now.
Even now, yeah.
Yeah. And then, but another, sort of thing that sort of galvanizes people to think about the need for a new Klan is the lynching of Leo Frank, who is a Jewish owner of a textile company. He comes down from New York into the Georgia area, and he's accused of killing one of his, young, employees. And of course, it's he gets a horrible trial.
But it was a killing and a rape, or was it just killing? I can't remember.
Just a killing.
Okay.
It's a horrible trial, and he's killed by a mob. Of course, quote unquote mob, because I hate the use of mob, but in this case, there's no organization, that is officially killing him. But it's not immediate. So we're talking about, if Birth of a Nation comes out in February, and that's in people's consciousness, Leo Frank is in August. And so it's he's killed in August, but his sort of dealing with all these issues is going on for a period of time before his killing. But also they kill him in one city, and then they take his body to another city and they dismember it in another city. This is how brutal it is, but it's also something that triggers, and becomes widespread sort of news. One, a Jewish immigrant to, so a Jewish immigrant coming down as as an authority. So he's not coming down as an employee. He's coming down as a manager, right? And then you have, because of so many immigrants coming into some of the cities, you have almost an increase of Black people coming back to southern cities. And that begins to sort of create the labor competition in the southern cities with the Black folks.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah. And
that's often, and he even said that in the book, but that's often a missed point about people coming back to in the city specifically, not the countryside so much, but yeah.
Yeah. Cause we always think that, there's, great migration, everybody would just fled the South. Like, no, people went to other places, went to the North, but then came back because now there's more labor competition, and they were frozen, and Black people were frozen out of jobs too, right? And so then that creates this instability in southern cities, because now they can't take this mass of Black people, and Black people then become the replacement for the sort of standard white people, right? In these southern cities. So these three sort of factors really fuel the second Klan, and the second Klan where they're at in Georgia. William Joseph Simmons is pretty sort of savvy, because not only is he a preacher and a farmer, but he's also a university faculty member. He hires two leading advertisers, Elizabeth Tyler and Edwin Clark. He hires the two of them, and they not only come up with ways to market the Klan, but they establish what we now call a pyramid scheme.
Yeah, multi-level marketing.
And so the business of the Klan is Klan membership, and so the whole objective, so we all have family members who were part of the eras of Amway, those life insurance products.
I mean, that's still going. Yeah.
Mary Kay Cosmetics. Yeah. These are the pyramid schemes. So basically, somebody, at a lower level is hustling, to, get all these people, and so if they get enough people, then they move up to another level, and their level, they don't have to pay as much of a fee for.
You got people working under you, and nowadays, with this neoliberal shit, you get to be your own boss and all that.
Right, and you keep going up.
Yeah.
So William Joseph Simmons never has to work again during this particular time period. I mean, he even buys $1 million mansion then, not $1 million in U.S. money now, $1 million mansion then.
I don't even want to know. I don't even know if you get an inflation calculator there, but that's probably.
And so it was a huge scheme, and people didn't really, know this, but that's what they established. Even the robes were rented. They didn't own.
What was the scheme like? Particularly, like I know they
$10 initiation fee, which is equivalent to about $100 a day.
So, and I want to pause there because who can pay it? Who can pay that initiation fee? Poor white people could not even afford the initiation fee.
Right.
Or even to get in it, you have to have enough money to pay to get in it.
Again, it's equivalent to $100 a day. So how many? I know Black Myths, has Patreons, and I'm sure all those Patreons are appreciated, but I'm sure
ain't nobody doing $100.
No. I did it for half a year at the beginning, just to help y'all out, but
and that's hard to sustain. Yeah.
And so $100 is tough for a lot of people, especially if it's an annual sort of dues. The other schemes of making money was that they didn't own their robes. So if you think about all these pictures, those robes weren't made by them. Sometimes, there's this, myth of, and who's making their robes and, who's cleaning their robes. No, all those robes were rented by the sort of leadership. So that was another fee. And you could not self-repair or self-make any robes. So if your robe got torn or it got grape juice on it or something like that, you had to send it to, back to whatever headquarters to either get professionally clean or get a replacement robe, or you had to pay a penalty for damaging a rented sort of product.
Playing with the K word again, these folks that did this were called Klegels.
Yeah,
Where
right.
people were that's what they
and they were paying what is it called, cloakins, like tokens. That was the fee. Yeah. But yeah,
it says paying commission and other expenses. Klegels into the field working on commission. They kept 80% of all fees collected from new members. Initiation fees paying were $10, paying commission and other expenses out of the 80% share.
So if you think about 4 million people on the low end, as members of the Klan, you could just imagine how much money, is coming through every year from this particular membership. And so this is also a drive to get more members, because the more members you get, the lesser your fees are, because basically the people who you get are paying your fee or portions of your fee, and so you move up in the pyramid scheme. And again, I think it's a great part of the history that most people really don't understand, because again, I know we're trying to reference the first episode, but it is important to reference first episode, because I remember one thing that you mentioned, and that is the importance of looking at the Klan through the Klan and not looking through the Klan through us. Those people who would be targeted by the Klan and so forth, because you wouldn't be paying attention to this. You wouldn't be looking for these things. You wouldn't, and when you came across them, you wouldn't deem them as important. It's just a fee, and you're like, whatever, racist paying a fee to this organization that's racist, right? That type of thing. But when you are researching this through the Klan, you're trying to understand how the Klan operates, function, how did it survive, and right. You can't get 5 million people together because, like I said last time, they put no 8 on their, cheeks, because, they hate, they hate people, right? Or, they don't have love for somebody else. Like, no, this is a club. This is an organization.
It's a hustle, man.
It's a hustle, and in certain particular contexts, you had to almost join them to be able to function and move up. I don't know how much we want to, put into, what Truman says in his memoir, but he said as a teenager, he joined the Klan because he had aspirations to go into politics, and if he did not join the Klan, he was not going to be able to, get into position. And I know some people may listen to that and be like, he's lying. No, Albert Smith was a candidate for the Democratic Party in 1928 and was not a Klan member. And he was the most popular candidate. They were willing to lose the presidential election to, instead of having Albert Smith, a Catholic, be their representative. And so this is how much.
I mean, can't remember the governor's name, and was in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
They were able to get him impeached.
Yeah.
And that was shortly for those. We might have talked about this if people go way back to our Tulsa episode, but yeah, like that was after that right. Massacre. But yeah, he tried to go at the Klan, and they had so much sway in that state. It's funny, the Klan actually arises after
Tulsa, after massacre. Right?
They didn't really have any.
Literally a year after. So it had nothing to do with the massacre. Had nothing to do with it.
For those who might be making that connection, but yeah, like they were able to impeach the governor because they had so much pull within because the governor tried to fight back, and they were like, nah, bro, like.
Well, even before that, they had, they were threatening to lynch him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Literally we were going to lynch the governor. And, again, I think people need to understand that, because, they may think that the Klan automatically got a pass, and they got a pass because everybody was on the same page as the Klan. And no, like, the Klan was.
They had real power, not just because it wasn't just hate in the air. Like, no, they had, and they could exact consequences. I mean, again, even if we think about now I'm using Trump because this is a reference for people, not that this is my favorite topic.
Yeah.
It's just like most people, if you, poll them privately, even the Republicans themselves probably can't stand this man. All right. Like, that's just what it is. But he's president and his people are on the hunt. So a lot of folks are bending the knee and folks are getting mad at people bending the knee. But this is how power works. Like, people will bend the knee. I think it's cowardly, like a lot of folks feel, but people are going to bend the knee because there are consequences. So like we just saw with the Jimmy Kimmel thing, and that's about a merger. People get it. I'm not going to get deep into that, but that's about some companies trying to merge. And they need a government's approval to do that. And since Trump lays out his hands, like, yo, if you want to get your merger done, like, you gotta play ball. Like, we see this with the universities. They don't, again, most universities are centrist, maybe center, left, whatever, right? They're not fans of, this administration, but they're playing ball, I'm just saying, like, that's how power works. Even if, so to your point, everybody doesn't have to be whatever people's idea of is like the worst kind of racist ever. They don't have to be that. And again, this is no defense of any of this. I'm just saying, we all live in a world that's ran by money and power, and you have to make choices based upon that. Even if you want to resist it, you still have to confront it. You can't just like be like, I don't want to be a part of that. Once it takes up enough space, you can't like just walk around it anymore.
Well, Simmons ends up hiring, not hiring, but bringing on other charismatic people to be leadership in different regions. No, and so one of the people that he brings on board is Hiram Wesley Evans, who ends up wrestling control away from Simmons later on. But Evans was a good organizer, and he also knew how to identify other potential organizers, and so he would train people that how you would come into a particular state and then go into a city and move through the city. Which neighborhood would you start in terms of recruitment? But we get into then basically how Indiana finally comes through, because Evans hires Simmons, and Evans hires Huffington, Joe Huffington, and Joe Huffington is the one that hires DC Stevenson. So it's like layers of hiring people to, based upon the level that they're in. So Huffington is like, over kind of like the Midwest or middle part of the country. Simmons and Evans has a lot of faith in Huffington. Huffington has seen the work of Stevenson, be effective in Texas. So he moves him to Indiana to grow it there. And reason being is that it's the lowest, it's the state with the lowest number of interested parties. And the reason being is because, so one, it's an open field, but also two, they perceive that there would be a lot more aggrieved people, especially because they were veterans of World War One. People who may not be familiar with Indiana, specifically Indianapolis, there is a series of war memorials all in downtown Indianapolis, because Indianapolis has a sort of inordinate amount of casualties in numerous wars, from the Civil War onward. And so up until this particular period, there's a lot of either dead residents of Indiana or highly injured ones. And so they think that this is a fertile ground to sort of build something from. And so DC Stevenson begins to move throughout the state. And literally every city that we can think of, except for Martinsville, Indiana, where we really don't have any sense of a chapter being formed under the Second Klan, much less having any significant sort of
that's the city.
presence.
It's funny because that's the city everybody
Yeah.
names. It also just kind of stereotypically sounds like a place where Black people lynched or something, which has, there are other areas.
And so a major incident does happen under the Third Klan, but we'll talk about that, in the next episode. But exactly, no, which is part of this way in which things become obscured. It just happens to not be a city that has any sort of significance, but and I know I've given given to Black here access to a folder that I keep all the images of different cities, both in Indiana as well as the country. I think it's almost 300 images of cities of Klan in the second Klan era. But you have all these images of Lafayette, New Albany, Indianapolis, Kokomo, Muncie,
and Indiana is interesting because this is where you really could see the operation build out, like reading not in reading the one by Madison, the Ku Klux Klan, the Heartland. He really lays out just the infrastructure. Like they have records, they have a record company, right? Like there's like replays. I don't know if they're the originals of some of the songs that the Ku Klux Klan put out.
Over all the USA, the fiery cross we display, the emblem of...
They had entire bands for the Klan. Like, again, the city I'm originally from, according to Madison, had the best band. Nothing I'm proud of.
They had radio stations to play that music.
Yeah.
They had other newspapers besides just that, besides the Imperial Nighthawk, Searchlight, and the Burning Cross. Their influence was large in Indiana, because
the women KKK was big in Indiana too. The WKKK. Don't know about there being a women KKK. Yeah,
right. But all throughout, the country, the Klan is big. One of the first Disney movies, has a kids Klan, group in it, right? They're in a little clubhouse and they got their hoods on.
I know. Yeah, I've seen. Yeah.
And like I mentioned already, later on, 1939, Gone with the Wind, has the Klan scene, Klan parts of it cut. 1924, June, Time magazine has Simmons on the front cover.
Yep.
And so it's heavily influential, but specific to Indiana, the governor Edward L. Jackson is put into office by the Klan. The mayor of Indianapolis is John C. Duvall. He's put into office by the Klan. And he was also put into office as Marion County treasurer before he was the mayor. Yep. But in terms of the entire country, the Klan was responsible for 11 governors to be elected, 75 representatives, 16 senators, and like I said, already Truman admitted to be a Klan member in his teens.
What was the last name is Black? He ended up being a Supreme Court justice.
Yeah, I can't remember his first name.
Oh man, he was down in the South. He worked with them on labor. Oh man, I'll look it up. But yeah,
and just like Leo Frank's lynching, helped to be one of those instigators. There's other incidents that also help with, increasing the fears and concerns, especially of immigrant horde, right? Because again, it's anti-Catholic, but we also forgot to mention that it's highly anti-Semitic, but anti-Semitic because Jews are associated with communism, and so they're fearful of their
Hugo Black.
Yeah. And but there's the Sacco, Vanzetti trial where these two, Italian anarchists. So they're anarchists, immigrants, and they're charged for armed robbery and murder in 1921. Of course, they're eventually executed in 1927, but there's an entire extended trial with, it being moved from different places because crowds are emerging and, demanding for blood. And of course, again, like I said, they eventually get executed. And so this is also another wave of anti-Italian American sentiment, and first Italian Americans were trying to push for a Sacco Vanzetti Columbus Day. In fact, even in the present day, some Italians want to get rid of Columbus Day and return to this sort of Sacco Vanzetti sort of recognition. But they were trying to merge it, in August for August 23rd to be an alternative to Columbus Day because of their outrage to how Sacco and Vanzetti were brought in on trumped up charges.
Right. So yeah, like again, I think the numbers are important. Like you said, you named. What can you say that again? How many senators, representatives?
Yeah, 11 governors, 75 representatives, and 16 senators.
Sheesh. And again, a Supreme Court justice. Hugo
Right.
literally,
and that's not state, and so none of these are like the state or mayors and so forth. This is just the more federal level influence. But these are the numbers of people who they get into office, or people had to go through them to get into office.
Yeah, Hugo Black gets. He didn't get it. They didn't get him on the Supreme Court, but he was part of that, and he's actually one of the senators. He's actually one of the senators that you named. Because he's a senator before he becomes a Supreme Court justice, and he was put on by Roosevelt. According to history, Roosevelt didn't know. I don't know if it would have mattered that he was in the Klan, prior to putting him up there. He obviously, at that point, that's in like 1937, so the Klan's not relevant anymore. But yeah, like that's the level of influence that he was able to emerge to. And I think,
and Roosevelt actually was the one that makes Columbus Day an actual national holiday, too. So just as another particular point, again, I mean, it's a real interesting, connection to Columbus Day that most of us don't know because, again, we assume it to be, just this other thing about pride about actual Columbus and not, hey, could you stop lynching us holiday, which it ultimately became.
right.
But, I think, tied to this, we can think about, yes, we have a sense of the states, but we also should think about the cities and regions, right? And so, the Klan was prominent in a number of different places. We already talked about Georgia because that's the birthplace of this second phase. We already talked
Atlanta was the headquarters, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because Stone Mountain was the site of the first ritual. And I think they actually they redid the opening ritual and put it onto film. And so Simmons is in his full garb and some other people, and so they do the whole reinitiation. And I think we also forgot to mention from Birth of a Nation too, what were the imagery? So the white robe with the red cross is from the Birth of a Nation. The burning of a cross is Birth of a Nation. These are all.
They didn't do that prior.
First Klan there's no evidence of a burning of a cross at all during the first Klan, at all, much less any of the other vigilante groups. It's in the Klansmen. So Thomas Dixon creates the sort of fiction of it in the book, but D.W. Griffith actually gives it life by showing it in live action. So I know we had forgot something to mention about.
Yeah, no, that's important because that what they did get out of that film, I mean, they got a lot out of it in terms of the Klan specifically, was this uniformity of the Klan that just like we had already said, it wasn't a thing prior to that film. They weren't all riding on horsebacks like they were in the movie, saving people. Like that's not what they were doing, in that first wave, but that becomes the representation. Obviously, that's something that people maybe know, even if not literally, but they wanted to aspire to in terms of being part of something. So you have these convergence of things with these conditions that we named that made people ripe for recruitment. You have very strong, marketing and recruitment, and people making money off of getting in the Klan. Like it's not that everybody signed up for the goodness of their hearts. And then we didn't really talk, even though we keep saying Protestants, we haven't really talked about churches, but like they were dropping off bags of money to churches. I mean, it was like the mob or something. Like they were dropping off. Especially, Madison talks about that in Indiana. They were just dropping off bags of money to these quote unquote Protestant churches, Presbyterians. Like, so they really ran the church too, right? Like, on that side of it, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, and the Klan spreads. I mean, throughout the country. So this is one of the few examples of an organization that really is national, right? So, Oregon, there was a significant Klan, population there, and in some cases, some people say that Oregon had the highest per capita Klan membership, out of any place, because it had up to 30,000 people, in relation to its overall population. Colorado was also heavily significant, at one point having 30,000 members just in Denver alone. Texas, of course, as a state, expanded, the Klan, to all levels of city government in Dallas, Fort Worth. California had a massive Klan, presence, and not just California, but Southern California. So Inglewood, Anaheim, San Diego were big Klan, cities. Like we can't even imagine Klan California, right? Like, and so I mean, it's an important sort of thing. The distinction. Ohio, Ohio had the second largest Klan membership, in the country, in the 1920s. Close to 200,000 membership. In Alabama, we mentioned, how influence they had. The governor Graves, David Graves, who took office in 1927, he was a Grand Cyclops. So he wasn't just a member, and he wasn't just a governor. He was also high in the leadership. He was the Grand Cyclops of the Montgomery Klan. And I think the Grand Cyclops position is just under Grand Imperial Wizard, or
Say that again.
I'm trying to remember the ranks, but anyway,
Imperial Wizard, Grand Dragon,
Cyclops.
I have that on my notes somewhere.
Yeah, but I don't know if those ranks are the same ranks. Like, saying like the third Klan made some modifications of the ranks.
So those Grand Dragons, congressional districts were Grand Titans, and then county leaders were Grand Giants. Is that consistent?
Yeah. So I don't think that's the second Klan.
Okay.
That's definitely the third Klan. And but Oklahoma, had impressive numbers of Klan Lane, like we already said. It grew in numbers after the Tulsa massacre, not before or, of course, during it. And then New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Chicago. Chicago was the city that had the largest Klan membership of a city. And you wouldn't even think of that, but it was very promptly ran out of the city of Chicago because of I think it's called the American League, who was a formation of influential immigrants.
Yeah, I mean there are still a lot of people that didn't like them, especially with their prohibition.
Right. Yeah, because they were very much in favor of prohibition.
Yeah. And I guess that leads to a broader question so I don't just micro the question. What were before we get to their decline, what were their actual political aims? Like we've hinted at it and spoke about it in passing, but I guess what were their general, like, because you talked about in the first episode about like there was a form of progressivism,
right,
or they weren't radicals or anything. But I'm saying like there was types of progressivism. They wanted they had these different ideas that, if you isolate them might not even sound that bad, right? Like if you isolate them. So, but what were their overall political aims? Like you said, this is a national movement, and they were very explicit in their own writings about this being a national thing. They weren't all that into that, like all politics is local. That's not how they actually conceived of it. So what were their political?
Yeah. So if we think about the Second Klan being 1915 to 1944, their entire platform was, based upon 100% Americanism, and that was a way to also diffuse. It was a way to sort of rally people. It was also a way to diffuse the older history of, it being, heavily violent, right? And so 100% Americanism made them more acceptable. And what did that mean? Anti-immigrant and nativists, so they were against Southern and Eastern European immigrants overall, Catholic or otherwise. And they were instrumental in actually, drafting the Emergency Immigration Act of 1921, as well as the National Origins Act of 1924. So they actually were part of drafting these legislations that barred these groups. Then they were anti-Catholic, and that was specifically tied to, what we talked about with the concerns of the Pope, being a sort of subversion of American leadership. And they also, with that, anti-Catholic, they were also, against Catholic schools.
And so they really fought against, private school.
And so there were cases of intimidation and some violence around actual, places of young people, right? And then they were anti-Semitic,
which made them oddly pro-public school. Like they were,
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Like there's these weird, or they were pro-women having the right to vote. They didn't want them working.
Right.
Were pro-women having the right. And they also wanted women to run for politics because they thought that reinforced the family.
Yeah. So I think that's part of the fact of when we, like we talked about with not understanding or thinking about the Industrial Revolution, like we don't really have a sense of that. We don't have a sense of the progressive era. So we think of the progressive era being something that is tied to what we call progressivism politically today, which is something on the, like it's a little bit past liberalism on the left, right?
Right.
No, progressive era was the birth of some of that politics. So you had some journalists who were really doing investigative, journalism, talking about the horrors of, the butcher industry, the meat warehouse industry.
You had like social workers,
farmers, exactly. So you had some positive aspects, but progressivism was also about everything moving forward, rapidly, and so that was also about moving rapidly as a society forward, and so it was no longer important to have women in the home and women to be in the background. They need to be also a part of, the lead, right? They need to also take matters into their own hand, which is why Elizabeth Tyler is one of the people, Simmons hires as a, advertiser, but then also this is why the Second Klan is widespread in terms of women's induction. You had some cases, women's membership being bigger than men's membership, depending upon the chapter. The first sort of induction of women was in 1924 in Long Island, New York. And so those three aspects, anti-immigrant and nativist legislation, anti-Catholicism, anti-Semitism were the sort of three areas of activity. And because of progressive, they then go and do, major Klan marches, three Klan marches in DC. But the first one, 1925, is huge, about 40 to 50,000 people in full Klan robes, representing each of their sort of states or cities, are marching, throughout the streets of Washington, D.C. The strategies, so those were the strategies and the tactics that they used were political intimidation, so suppressing voters, scaring electors, scaring, opposing candidates, which included Black people, right? So in some cases, Black people were still trying to engage in the voting process, and they were intimidated from, doing so. They would also control local governments, which we already have alluded to. And this included, not just, running the mayors and city councils, but also the business bureaus of a particular city. They also engaged in education and moral reform. So this is what we already talked about with being prohibition, but then also by ironically being
Public education.
yeah, seeing public education as a mandatory,
Yeah, and even like infrastructure projects, like you'll find certain cases where they were advocating to have roads built and street lights, and they weren't necessarily like hardline like Republicans in the way we would understand them today, like small government types or whatever. That's not. I don't even, their political framework probably doesn't even make sense. There's maybe some people today that have this kind of left-right view of the thing, like it's kind of but it's also it's also always shows like you have these strands of, white folks who, I mean, even the New Deal, it's not the Klan, but I'm saying even the New Deal has this tinge of like progressivism in the sense that you believe in like social safety net, but it would build on literally like the deal actually was to say, okay, we won't give this to Black people. That's how you get the South to vote for it. Like, so I'm just saying like there's always these tinges of white folks, wanting some kind of government, support, infrastructure, but not necessarily wanting that for everybody, right? Like that's not, and it shows up in different ways. In this case, it's the Klan, but it shows up in different ways.
Yeah, and some additional sort of tactics they also engaged in suppressing organized labor.
Yep.
So they were anti-union.
They were they had a weird view on labor in general.
Yeah,
capital and labor.
But right, because it's weird because they were against the capitalists.
Yeah.
But they were also against, union organizing. So they wanted fair wages, but they didn't want the workers to form unions to get those fair wages.
Very strange.
And some of this is connected, some of this is also not connected. So the anti-union can be thought of as being connected to, the anti-communists, but they weren't yet anti-communist. They were Catholic, anti-Semitic, right? So it's anti-communist in the third sort of Klan, but they see the connection of communism and socialism being as an ethnic trait of Jews that were coming in.
Right. And like I said earlier, even also thought it could get in Black people's minds too. Like you see that literature even in there, even back then. Yeah.
And so 1920s there's scores of major strikes, this is also the 1920s is the era of what some people may remember as the Triangle Shirtwaist factory fire, where it was all those women that were trapped in the burning sort of floor, it was burning, but also that they were losing oxygen, and many of them jumped to their deaths and so forth. But before that, they had different types of strikes of 10,000, 20,000, 60,000 people, but of course they were immigrants, and so again suppressing organized labor, and they also wanted to maintain a cheap labor supply. And so this was, about intimidation and violence to keep Black people in a particular, economic, position, but also preventing people from disrupting that Black people's position, either in pushing Black people, socially mobile up or eliminating Black labor.
Right. So they have their political goals, but then like a lot of movements, people get rich, folks, they start really benefiting off of a movement, and things start to turn a different direction. So I'm gonna come to Indiana because I do think that's one of the most crucial moments of their decline. And we know the case of DC Stevenson, right? And we've talked about this on this show, I think, in other instances. So just to kind of set the scene again, in 1925, somewhere between 6 to 8 million members, likely by 1930, they're at 30,000. So something happens between, in those 5 years, that is a reverse of what happens between, 1915 and 1920. So there's this reverse that happens. And I think it's not the only reason. There's a lot of reasons why it collapsed, but I think especially since we did open with Indiana. So what happens in Indiana with DC Stevenson, who is the Grand Dragon of Indiana, who has a mansion at this point? What happens in Indiana? And the story is wild, honestly, but like what happens that leads to that starts with this decline, and then what are some of the other factors maybe as well?
Well, I mean, I think going back, we mentioned that while we talked about these strategies and tactics that they engaged in, the big thing really, remember we said earlier, was that the business of the Klan was Klan members. And so the people in leadership were really using this to make money for themselves. And so Simmons, I guess we mentioned, had $1 million mansion back then, and he used his Klan sort of leadership to wine and dine and connect for his own personal sort of benefit. And so Hiram, Wesley Evans, and others are challenging his sort of role with leadership because they think that he's not a true believer. He's not doing what every other person is doing, right, at all. So DC Stevens is really technically reflecting this. But before we get to DC Stevens, I just want to kind of set that.
Go ahead, yeah.
Because Hiram Wesley Evans sees the abilities of DC Stevenson in terms of what he grows in Indiana, and they begin to talk about either having a distinct clan, two separate clans, or having one clan under DC Stevenson. But that doesn't happen because, of course, while they oust Simmons and Evans becomes over the
1920, that was in 1924, right?
Right. And so Evans becomes head of the National Klan in place of Simmons. DC Stevenson is now, he has already separated Indiana state as a part of the National Klan and its own clan. And so DC Stevenson is doing the same thing in terms of the type of money that he has and so forth. And so he has a personal assistant secretary who travels with him, who is also a teenager. Her name was Madge Oberhauser. And, and he basically, what we have a sense of in their travels, while she's technically a true personal assistant and secretary, he has been sexually assaulting her on the travels. And it gets to a particular point that in one incident that, he sexually assaults her again and kills her. So it leads to, of course, the fact it becomes exposed. He gets arrested. There's a massive trial in 1925.
I want to go back though, because I did the circumstances that he did it was, I do think, are worth mentioning. Like I don't want to get into the grotesque part of the rape, but she after he assaults her, she actually tries to commit suicide.
Right. So he holds her captive on a private train car because if she commits suicide, then people who have some sense of what's been going on will now have fuel, and so he tries to, of course, physically abuse her to sort of keep her in place. But of course, she dies because of the level of.
And doesn't he have his people drop her off at home? Remember,
Yes.
that she has his people drop her off at home because she had taken a substance.
Mercury chloride.
Yeah,
It was poisoning.
and she dies of a staph infection actually because he had bitten her. And again, I won't get into all of that, but but when he takes her home, she's able to give a written confession before she dies.
Before she dies. Yeah.
And that's how we get much of the story, because obviously he wasn't going to tell anybody. I just think that's how, I just want people to understand how terrible this person was. Rape is bad enough, but the way that, this went down, like he gave up, has his people drop her off, and it blows back on him. She's actually able to tell what happened. And then,
yeah. And also, I mean, this is not just a random, unknown woman, girl that's traveling with them. People have seen her repeatedly in all these other contexts. I mean, she's accompanying him to the Indiana General Assembly. He's, going to Rotary meetings with her. So people are fully aware of her. She is a functioning personal assistant and secretary for him.
And she does literacy programs.
Yeah. So this adds to when she, of course, eventually dies, but gives this written statement, why it blows up so much. It's not just that he raped and murdered this person. It's the fact that people also were highly aware of this. And so they could also, in their mind, imagine how long this had been going on to some degree, right? So yeah, I think that is important. And like I said, we don't need to get into the details of, because it's enough,
Yeah, that part, but just that last little slither where he drops her off. Yeah.
And so, so ultimately he gets arrested, and, goes to jail. He's sent to jail and, related to, some of your own work, and some of the various state prisons that, eventually some of the people of the Pendleton the Pendleton uprising have been sort of, served time in.
Yeah. And, he, and then, so a lot of people resign upon learning about this. And then he go and like start telling on the
so he becomes a snitch, to reduce his sentence. And so he makes available the entire membership log for the state of Indiana, all of the members of the Klan, and what chapter they're affiliated with and their rank. And so we mentioned earlier the governor, Edward Jackson, and the mayor. When you look at their time period, of being in office for a year, it's because of the release of this list. And so they end their office either in 1925 or 1926 because they're forced to, because all these people who have their positions because of the Klan. In fact, the mayor, it was the mayor. The mayor actually shows the memorandum that, he had to commit to, like, I will not put anybody in position that the Klan has not approved of. And so basically it exposed the fact that the Klan didn't just get him into office. The Klan was the actual mayor. They were the ones telling him, what to vote on.
He was literally just a parrot puppet.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they're out, and these people are in all types of different political parties. I think that's also an important piece to sort of, speak to, is that it's not like this is all just in one particular political party. Jackson's in the Republican And like I said earlier, Albert Smith. I mean, so they had
and that was their strategy. They wanted to donate and influence both parties. They took a very non-alignment position. They were not hardline. That's part of why the politics was so weird, because they didn't really need to hold a consistent line, aligned with a party. Like they were their own party, in many ways,
Yeah. So he basically snitches, and that also helps to collapse the Klan because all these people, leave their posts in leadership. This also speaks to the journalism of people at the Indianapolis Star and so forth, because they were the ones that were brave enough to.
It was in Indianapolis Times, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then
Did the Times become the Star? I don't know the history.
No, I think it was separate. I think it's separate, but there were reporters, a bunch of reporters who started to sort of speak to this. But it was first the Times that really.
I got a Pulitzer for that, I believe, or however you say it, Pulitzer. Yeah,
yeah. The Indianapolis Times is noted because they were always against them. So they were the stalwart sort of constant sort of pushback. In fact, one of the art pieces at Indiana University that has always garnered so much criticism is the Thomas Benton murals, and he has these murals in different sort of parts that sort of look at the history of Indiana. It's chopped up into different parts, so some of it is in one building and another part is in another building. But in this one particular building, which I forgot, what the name of it is because it's been so long since I haven't been in Indiana. It has actually the Klan and the cross, but underneath it has a journalist. And so most students thought it was like celebrating the Klan. But the panel is called Parks, the Klan, and the Press, or the order of the word or the words might be off. But nonetheless, those are the three sort of parts of it, because in this panel, it shows the sort of rise of the park system, the state park system, like the Indiana Dunes and so forth. But it also shows, the rise of the Klan, but it also shows how important the press was in terms of exposing the Klan. And that's what Thomas Burton, Thomas Burton was actually sort of trying to show, in the entire mural, was being anti-Klan, but people thought it was pro-Klan technically, and so that collapses it. Nationally, what ends up happening is a number of different things. Of course, the Depression hurts the Klan because people can't afford membership. Also, people are unemployed, period. Not just can't afford, but they're completely unemployed. Then you have, of course, the World War. It began to, so a lot of attention is on that. And at this, just before it, Hiram Evans was beginning to partner up with the German American Bund, which was a group of German Americans who were trying to establish a sort of a Nazi sort of, early neo-Nazi, proto-neo-Nazi group in the United States. And so he was beginning to partner with them, especially in like New Jersey. And so that affiliation did not go over well with World War II or the leading up to World War II, because who's the enemy, right? Like it's Japan and, Italy and Germany. And then additionally, what we sort of spoke to at the very beginning about whiteness, Jewish populations, Italians were always sitting now, being sort of grandfathered in as white because they needed, a appearance of a diverse military force, both for internal recruitment, but also as, external PR, so it would anger the Germans that we actually have, Jewish soldiers, right?
And then also, like, even just industry at that point, like you always have these early pains of when the industry transitions, and then it just becomes the way of life.
Yeah.
And they lost that battle. I'm talking about the petty bourgeois that we were talking about earlier. Like they lost that battle. Like, industrial capital won.
And then Also, the IRS during World
Yeah.
War goes after the Klan because they didn't pay for taxes all during the 20s.
Yeah.
So with their pyramid scheme,
600 something thousand, which is a lot of money back then. Just,
yeah. You know, like I said, if $10 is the equivalent of $100 a day, you know, so so they did not pay taxes all throughout the 20s with their entire income. So there was probably missing books and so forth that got extra penalties, attached to it, and so there were all these hits that basically crumbled the Klan, and so similar to the first Klan, yeah, there were probably remnants, and so there's image evidence of, chapters taking pictures in like the late 1940s, but it's like a sad picture because it's like three people, in the picture representing the entire city, four people, and when you look at it, it's like, is that a family? Because it's like a man, a woman, and these like three short people in hoods, and it's like, oh, that's his kids, right? Like, and so, uh, so I'm just saying. And so I mean, there's these, and so it kind of shows, how it went from like these images of thousands of people, in a image, and not just the march in DC, but thousands of people like at night, in the woods, and so forth, go to, 3, 4 people representing an entire city. So the Klan completely sort of disappears, not only as a national body, but a thing of any influence. They do retain its pro-Americanism, but no one really cares about it. And so it's not until, factors of the third Klan that sort of revives, that Klan era. But yeah, Stevenson's conviction, the corruption overall, and then just the image that was discredited. But like I said, there was all these other factors like the war, and
right, like I said, the Great Depression,
yeah,
the 29 or whatever one. Yeah, like it,
and I know I mentioned the German American bun, but there was a growing sort of lean towards that particular approach of white nationalism and white separatism, and so that was a competition piece that we'll probably continue in a conversation around the third Klan because it was beginning. So first, Hiram was trying to create this sort of connection with them, but once the Klan sort of dissolved, um, it's the German American Bund and like organizations that are maintaining the membership or the interests of those people who did believe in the sort of anti-people, anti-whoever people, right? They had now a place to go to since the Klan wasn't any place to go to.
anti-life equation.
Yeah, and I think well, we probably can continue that part because there's some housing part, that also plays a part because it's not necessarily desegregation, but you have a lot of these racial covenant, enclaves that begin to become desegregated, but not really because of civil rights laws, but because these owners were greedy and they were like, it's no longer profitable just to keep an all white population in Levittown or some other particular, area. So they started to like take whoever in, and that created, another hysteria. That is the recipe for the emergence of the third Klan. But I'm also saying it as
Blockbusting.
yeah, but I'm also connecting it as a thing that also kind of killed the second Klan because people were moving out of the city. Right, Levittown is out of Philadelphia.
And yeah, and you also, again, we could go all day, but you have the construction of highways that starts around this time too,
Yeah.
right? So now people have the ability to get out of the city, much easier than they could even 10 years ago.
Yep.
So yeah, again, it's a very good example for base superstructure kind of. Like if you could teach a class just you could teach base superstructure off everything we say because it's really,
just that.
yeah, you really can see how the base really, Like the actual social relations are dictated by, the technological advancements and so even racism and white supremacy has to morph around these things. It doesn't necessarily get to just survive beyond that. And it's like our contradictions because it was at the end of the day, it was a business.
Yeah. I mean, I hope people really see, why, we had to split it up, right? Because if we folded these three in, it'll be, while it would still be a long episode, it wouldn't, it would miss certain things because we're trying to smash them all together into one discussion. But so again, hopefully when people, are listening to these, they really can sort of find things within them and look up the information themselves. But to really see how, not only how distinct they were, but how much depth, each phase of the Klan and the eras that they represent.
It was still a lot we didn't even get into. And as long as we've been on here, there's still a lot we didn't get into. But it also speaks to, again, I could go on and on. I just find I think the contradictions of this era are just so interesting to me because you see they are in this in between of they're not, like you said, they're not with capital, like in the traditional sense. Like they are very much critical in their writings of the Rockefellers and the Carnegie, all of that.
Exactly.
Also like anti-union. They're also like obviously they become anti-communist, like they're anti-labor. They think there's some kind of like third way. And I'm saying, I think the Republican Party today is trying to wrestle with that. They're not, it's all over the place. But you see some of those remnants in the sense that, obviously they're big money, like, but I'm just saying, the rhetoric comes out of like it's this anti-establishment, the elites, the globalists, but they're just pulling from that era. I think in some sense they just learn like we can just pimp this rhetoric out because it is very appealing to a specific demographic of white folks in this country, and increasingly, some people of color as well. Like it is a very appealing because it finds a way. And that's the part where I think if you want to say fascism, that's the part where there is some actual parallels because that's what fascism as an actual ideology did historically. Is it kind of positions itself in this kind of fake leftist lane,
right?
It talks against like the big capitalists who are maybe too exclusive to them, but also is like very anti-communist, anti-left in any real sense. That's so it's like that in that sense, I can see some of it, but I don't usually hear it framed that way. And I think this era really shows you, because it is interesting. The Klan is rising at a time that fascism was very much on the rise too, right? Second run,
Yeah. And then with the anti-Semitism part, people don't really even connect, again, the Klan to that. And more importantly, people don't really connect the Klan to, the prominence of the mythical protocols of the Elders of Zion. So this is around this same time period as the Second Klan. That's a Klan produced propaganda piece, subverting, Jewish, sort of presence, both in terms of their religious moral values, but also their political leanings, especially that sort of wave of Jewish immigrants who were predominantly socialist, workers, and so, yeah, I think there's a lot of things that, we can also learn from this era, a lot of things that come out of this era, but yeah, it definitely, I think we covered a lot.
Yeah, it's midnight, so I thought I need to get off here, but thank you. Yeah, I don't know how I'm gonna chop this up. This actually felt for me, it felt like it breezed by. I don't know how it's gonna be for the listeners, because I just feel like there's a lot of dynamic information. Not that the first episode was bad, just feel like this one really opens it up because the era of America you get to walk into, it just gives you so many toys to play with, right?
Yeah, right.
But yeah, we'll be back for the third one, and that might be the fourth episode, depending on how this gets broken down. But we'll be back for the third one. But yeah, thank you again. And, I'm going to immediately get on the readings for the third. The one that I probably have the most memory in terms of just off the top of my head.
Hey y'all, and if you have any comments or just thoughts on episodes to come, feel free to just leave us a review and rate the show and tell us how you